biblically, before the Seder, that day you cannot own any chametz. And we said you have to do two things. One thing is you have to announce all your chametz ownerless, and the other thing you have to do is you have to check for it and destroy it. The rabbi said, you may announce it ownerless, but you might forget, or you might not, you might subconsciously take it and everything like that. Or you might announce it ownerless and not mean it. So anyways, so what do? You search all the places at the 14th, and then you gather everything and you put it in one place. And then until the next day you have until the 6th hour, so it's an hour before midday. In other words, the beginning of the 6th hour, end of the 5th, and you destroy it then. Or you can destroy it the night before, the Rambam says. The chametz that you put on the 14th, you put away on the 14th in order to eat. So in other words, some chametz you're going to destroy. You find some chametz, you're going to destroy that, and some you're going to eat. You put it out until to eat 4 hours. You shouldn't put it around on all places. Rather, you should put it in a specific place and be careful of that it doesn't get mixed in. So let's say you're going to eat cereal for breakfast or whatever it is, make sure you know where that is. And because if you're not, then you might need to search for it, et cetera, and you're not going to be conscious of it. We spoke about different mice taking things and stuff like that and spreading them around the house. If the 14th falls out on Shabbos, then we had this a couple of years ago, when do you check the chametz? You check it the day before the Shabbos. It was interesting, that year, that Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos. So it's a very busy morning on Shabbos. So you have to daven very early. So we daven here 7:30 a.m. And we had 9 people. This came 7:30. And one person didn't show who said they were going to show. Anyways, that person showed at 9:30 a.m. And he told me, he said, I never would imagine it would be 7:30. So I thought you meant, okay, a little earlier, 9:30. But anyways, this reminded me.
So
he thought 7:30 meant
9:30 instead of 10.
He thought I meant 9:30, obviously, and 7:30 was a typo. Anyways, so what you do is you check it the night before. So you check it on Thursday night, which is going to be the night of the eve of the 13th, and then you put enough to eat until the 4th hour on Shabbos. And then Shabbos, you have to get you put a little bit in a set place. The rest you destroy before Shabbos. And if you have on Shabbos after, what you do is you cover it with a vessel until Yom Tif, and then you destroy it because you can't burn it on Shabbos. So what we actually do is we have a little bit of bread that we put aside, and then we make hamotzi, and then we flush it down the toilet because that's a way we could destroy it, or if there's anything extra, or you try and just have minimal amount of stuff that you won't have to destroy because you have to eat bread on Shabbos. You're not able to eat matzah on Shabbos because you can't eat matzah 30 days before Passover.
No.
So you can't eat matzah that day because you're supposed to be excited to eat it at night. So you can't eat matzah. You can't eat and chametz you don't want to eat. So what you do is you keep chametz around, a little bit of chametz around. That's what we do. If you have many loaves of truma, and you need to burn them on Erev Shabbos, you shouldn't mix the pure. So you have things which are pure with impure. You shouldn't mix the pure things with impure. Rather, you should burn the pure for itself and the impure for itself, and leave from the pure what to eat until 4 hours a day. Someone who forgot and he didn't check on the night of the 14th, he could check in the morning. If he didn't check in the morning, he can check when he's destroying. If he didn't check when he's destroying, he can check during the holiday. If the holiday passed and he didn't check, he can check after the holiday. Because, as we said yesterday, if you have chametz on Pesach and you don't deal with it, it's not kosher anymore after Passover. So if you have a bottle of vodka and you have to either destroy it or you have to sell it to Gentile, if you don't do that, that bottle of vodka can never be consumed. You have to flush it down. There's nothing, even if it's...
Isn't vodka from potatoes?
No, most vodka is from wheat. There are some potato vodkas.
Grain.
Yeah.
Grain, okay.
There are some potato vodkas which are okay, but we're talking about anything that's chametz that lasts over Pesach in your house has to be destroyed. So it could be 3 weeks after Pesach, and you find out you got to check your house for the chametz that you had on Pesach and destroy it. Okay, it's not kosher. All right. When you check chametz on the night of the 14th, or on the day of the 14th, or during the holiday, you make the bracha al bir chametz. Asher kitshanu, the God commanded us, sanctified us, and commanded us to destroy the chametz. And you search in all the places that you brought chametz, as we said before. And if you do it after the holiday, to collect the things that you missed, that you didn't check for, then you don't make a blessing. Because you're not really commanded to check anymore. That stuff is not kosher, right? So, okay. When you when you finish checking, if you checked on the night of the 14th, Or on the day of the 14th, you have to be mavatal. You say, any chametz that I have and I'm not aware of, it is like nothing to me. It is like dirt. However, if you check from the 14th and above, you don't need to do it because chametz, no longer belongs to you. The chametz in your house on Pesach, it doesn't belong to you. Therefore, if you didn't do it before the 6th and you find chametz and you didn't destroy it, it's a sin because you didn't get rid of it. And now you cannot nullify it. Nullify it means you say it no longer belongs to me because it doesn't really belong to you, and the verse makes it like it belongs to you. So chametz, basically, it doesn't belong to you on Pesach except in the context of the Torah. The Torah says the chametz doesn't belong to you except that you own chametz. So therefore, you can no longer nullify it. It's not yours to nullify. But what you can do is you can destroy it.
So you can't give it away to the Gentile.
You can't give it away to Gentile. It's forbidden to give away to Gentile. It's forbidden to get any pleasure from it.
Because it's no longer yours.
It's no longer yours, and it's forbidden to have benefit from. And giving it to Gentile is beneficial.
Well, if you take no money, it's still beneficial.
Yeah, because giving gifts
Okay.
is a good feeling. Okay. So you have to destroy it whenever you find it. And if you find the holiday, you can put a vessel on top of it, and then, because you can't burn it on the holiday, let's say, can't destroy it, and wait till nighttime and destroy it right away. And if it's holy, in other words, you dedicate it to the temple, you don't have to cover a vessel, because there's this concept in Judaism that if you, which we don't really have nowadays, but let's say I say this book belongs to the temple in Jerusalem. Shh, it's no longer mine. It's no longer mine. It belongs to the temple in Jerusalem. And actually, you mentioned the mitzvah of Me'ilah today. If you use it, it's a grave sin because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the temple in Jerusalem. And if you use it, you have to actually pay it the value to the temple plus a fine. So those things, if you have chametz, which you dedicate to the temple before Pesach, you don't have to cover it because it's so strict not to use it. You're not going to use it. Yeah.
So you can dedicate something to the temple, yet it's physically still with you,
Correct.
but you cannot use it.
Well, you cannot use it because it doesn't belong to you anymore. Yeah, you have to, it belongs to the temple. But that's a concept called hekdesh. Here, hekdesh comes from the word kodesh. You make it holy. Here, we're not talking about that concept so much. We're just saying that if you have chametz, which is hekdesh, then you don't need to cover it on the holidays because you anyways keep a distance.
If you have a Talmud,
Yeah.
you dedicate it to the temple.
Volume of Talmud is not a good example because you can technically read it without damaging it. I'm talking if you have a field, you have land and you dedicate the temple, you cannot use the land anymore. Yeah.
So the book a holy book you can refer to.
You know, a book is a discussion because books do have wear and tear. But on the other hand, if you don't open books, that also destroys books. So there's a whole balance that if you have a book that doesn't belong to you, you're supposed to use it periodically enough to keep the joints, still greased, and not enough to destroy the book. Okay. So, and that's especially back then when they had scrolls. The scrolls were much more. Shoshana. Shh. Okay. So, someone went out of his house before the time to destroy it to do a mitzvah, or to eat a sudas mitzvah like a wedding, and he remembers he has chametz in his house. He's able to return and do it, destroy it. And if not, he has to nullify it in his heart. If he's going to be saving somebody from a war, from a river, from a fire, from all these things, then he should nullify it in his heart. Again, if he comes back, it doesn't matter your excuse for not destroying your chametz. The chametz is a sin, right? So therefore, you should nullify it in your heart. If he goes out for his own needs and he remembers his chametz, he should go right away. And how much should he go back for? Until the size of an egg. If it's less than an egg, then he can. So if you're shopping or you're in Phoenix going to the doctor, you don't have to go to the doctor that day, right? So you should return and destroy your chametz. Now, let's say it is less. If you have to go, then you can nullify it in your heart. But if it's more than an egg's worth, then you should go back. Okay, someone who left kneaded dough. Now, what's kneaded dough? It's going to become chametz, right? It's going to become chametz in his house, and he remembers it, and after he's teaching and he's worried maybe it's going to come chametz before he comes back, he's studying with his teacher, he can nullify it in his heart. However, once it becomes chametz, it doesn't help anymore. Rather, he always, so kneaded dough on Passover, if you mix dough, there's a certain period of time until it becomes chametz.
Right, 18 minutes?
Yes, so until that time, you can nullify in your heart because it's not chametz yet, so it still belongs to you. But after that, you can no longer do it. And you have to destroy it right away when you get home. How do you destroy the chametz? You burn it, or what you do is you break it up into crumbs outside, let it go in the wind, or you throw it into the sea. And if it's hard chametz and the sea won't destroy it quickly, you should grind it up before you put it in the sea, crumb it up. And chametz, which a building falls on it and comes out, there's earth on top of it, which is up to 3 handbreadths, so about 9 to 12 inches, or more than that, it's considered destroyed. And you still need to nullify in your heart if the 6th hour didn't come. If you give it to a Gentile before the 6th hour, you don't need to destroy it. And if you burn it before, then it's permitted. You can use the coals on Pesach, but it's totally burnt. However, if you burn it from the 6th hour and above, so let's say you find it on the holiday and you burn it on the holiday, since it is forbidden to have benefit, you cannot use the coals, right? And if you use the coals, now whatever you cooked with it is forbidden to eat, right? Because you got benefit from the chametz on the holiday. And the coals of this person are forbidden for benefit, because you already burned it when it was forbidden to have benefit. So those are the laws of. So, anyways, nowadays to get around this, what we do is we sell our chametz to a Gentile, and that way our chametz does not belong to us. Again, one time I sent an email out, and I, urge people to sell your chametz, because if you own chametz on Passover, it's a sin. Now, if you say the prayer that denounces that you ownership, the Talmud says a lot of people, we don't necessarily mean it in our heart, and human beings don't really know if they mean it in their heart, right? You only a lot of times know if you mean something in your heart when it comes to when there is a physical, if someone takes it and it doesn't bother you, you don't know. So therefore, it's so important to sell the chametz. I once sent an email out and someone responded, this is the problem with Judaism. You're giving your chametz to a Gentile. This is horrible. But in the Torah, a Gentile is perfectly allowed to eat chametz on Passover. Only a Jew is not. So therefore, it's a very good way we sell our chametz. And now we still destroy it and we still do all 3 things, because there might be chametz we find in our house, and even though it belongs to someone else, we may end up wanting to eat it or use it or whatever it is. So therefore, we do all these safety barriers, but that's why people don't realize it's so important to sell your chametz before Passover. All right.
The Rambam makes all these references to nullifying in your heart.
Yeah.
Did they have contracts the way we do now?
So the selling of chametz came out later. There are Jews who would not sell their chametz, even till today. They have to get rid of it. Selling a chametz ideally is like for dishes and stuff like that. The contracts we do nowadays came out later in history. It came out not that much later in history, but it wasn't around. People didn't do it in the times of the Talmud. Now, it's interesting. If you live in a Jewish community, it's not always easy to sell it to a Gentile. If you live in a very Jewish, in America, it's always easy, and even in Israel. But there's famous stories of people who in Russia and Europe trying to sell their chametz to Gentiles, and no one's around, or anyone who's around, they all say, let's not buy it from him, because if we buy it from him, he'll keep ownership, right? But if we don't buy it from him, we could just take it from him, right? We could take his chametz. But again, it's like nowadays we have modern dishes, fridges, we have preservatives. We have a lot of chametz coming into Pesach. In the olden days, food only lasted a couple of days.
You're supposed to get rid of your dishes?
You would need to get rid of your dishes because your dishes are chametz stick, yeah. But what we do is we sell our dishes.
Where do you keep them in the house?
You can keep them in the house, yeah.
And what about like a liquor store owner, same thing?
Liquor store, we spoke about this a couple of days ago. if a liquor store owner does not sell, he's Jewish and he does not sell his chametz, then all the booze which is in there over Passover is garbage. He has to throw it out. It's forbidden. It's not kosher anymore, even though it says kosher. It's forbidden to drink.
So what does he do?
He sells his store to a Gentile over Pesach.
Oh, that's a leap of faith.
Well, again, you can sell it. Most Gentiles, you could sell. Yeah, you sell it to a mass sale. Like they don't even know what you have. You know, it's not really a leap of faith. Yeah.
Halachically, today, nullification in your heart is not accepted.
It's not enough. Now, the reason why the rabbi said it's not enough, you should do it. But in the Talmud, already in the Talmud times, they were worried that maybe you don't mean it fully. And it's very hard for humans to define if they mean it, you know? So we say it, we try and mean it, we say we mean it, but just in case in the times of the Talmud, they said you have to destroy all chametz also, because the nullification should only be for things that you didn't destroy, you didn't find. Because what happens is you might find a bottle of Blue Label, which is $300, and you say, well, I want to keep this, I don't want to buy another bottle of
And you start negotiating with yourself.
Exactly.
I think Maimonides is trying to block every possible rationalization we can come up with.
Well, correct, and we want to make
Sure,
sure that we're able to do the mitzvah properly.
He's very, he's by the book,
And
the original book.
Okay, so we're going to study a Sikha on Bereshis. Now, this is an interesting style one. I think we should do the first one. It's going to be kind of long. Now, to note about Genesis, just a note about Bereshis. Bereshis is one of the hardest books of the Torah
really,
because, first of all, the beginning of Genesis is almost all spiritual, talking about spiritual concepts. The beginning of creation, right? When we get to Avraham and Noach, we get a story a little bit, and it's not so difficult. But the first Bereshis, all Adam, Chava, and there's tons of midrashim. So if you really want to understand what the Jewish tradition, it's tons of information, and it's very, very deep, very, very spiritual. And it's just God trying to tell us how He created the world. So we have an inkling, very simply, we have an inkling from where the world came from and who created it. And there's of course a lot of commentary and stuff like that, but really the understanding of it is endless, of the beginning of Bereshis. Now there's Rashi, and Rashi kind of gets us through it in a simple way to get us to. Now Bereshis, of course, is just to get us to Shemos, to get us to the founding of the Jewish nation. And the founding of the Jewish nation, which is Shemos, is just to get us to Vayikra, which is how to serve God. In other words, to know how to serve God, you got to know our history. You got to know how God chose Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, how we ended up in Egypt, how God took us out. All these things are relevant to the mitzvahs. So here is a Sikha, a talk of the Rebbe, which is about the first Rashi in Chumash. Now the Rebbe was extremely, extremely careful about Rashi, and it loved taking apart Rashi so much. And for many people, it's kind of their most favorite commentaries, Rashi, because Rashi gives. Now, what Rashi is doing is he's not trying to make the Torah understandable. He's trying to take all this commentary and give us a simple approach. A lot of times when we hear stuff on the Torah, we're like, oh, that's cool or that's meaningful. But it's not necessarily true. Now, even if it's true, it's not, there's so many layers of Torah that we need to jump into to understand the Torah. So Rashi, what he's doing is essentially he's taking all the commentary on the Torah. He's an incredible genius. And he's summarizing it in a way that we can get a simple interpretation out of it. So here, let's going to start. So, Doiver Kama Pamim. So this is a talk from the Rebbe. So, from 1971. Now, notably, the Rebbe every Shabbos would take one Rashi or a couple of Rashis and really hammer it with questions. And usually he'd give people a week to think about it. And then the next week he would give a brilliant answer, answering all the questions. And that form of study of Rashi, I mean, it's incredible. Now, the Rebbe would also say, well, Rashi had Ruach HaKodesh. Rashi had a spirit of prophecy in him. We have a tradition that Rashi was like a prophet. He had a sixth sense. Ruach HaKodesh means he had a spiritual spirit inside of him. So the Rebbe would also say, oh, besides the simple meaning in Rashi, there's all these different spiritual levels in Rashi also. It's not just a simple explanation of Rashi.
So would it be wrong to say he was divinely inspired?
Yes, so Rashi was divinely inspired, and actually there is a Jewish tradition that all rabbis until a certain point had a strong level of divine inspiration, and then after that, only some once in a while there's a rabbi who does. Okay.
Are you on page 3?
Page 3. Dover Kava Pamim. We spoke many times. The Af Shekinyan Shel Pirush Rashi Al Terhu Levar Pshuta Shemikra. Even though now Rashi sometimes will say in the Torah, he'll say, I don't know the explanation for this. And if you look in the Midrash, there are dozens of explanations. But Rashi's saying, I don't know a simple explanation for this. Because Rashi, in the beginning of the Torah, he sets his rules of what a simple explanation is. And then he always finds, so there is even a book that's called Klali Rashi, the rules of Rashi. Because in order to set a simple explanation, you have to have rules of how to define a simple explanation.
That sounds like it should be public knowledge.
We explain everything simply,
Sure.
and he's extremely consistent.
Okay.
In other words, consistency. So that reading that book is kind of like reading the Constitution, reading like a legal book on the Constitution. Like everything has to fit in these laws, not necessarily. Okay. So, anyways, we spoke many times. The main thing that Rashi does is he tries to explain a term which is called Pshuta Shel Mikra, the simple meaning of the verse. Rashi answers b'kama kaimus. Rashi, as Rashi says in many places. A lot of places he says, by the way, I'm only explaining the simple interpretation. Nevertheless, in Rashi, in his simple explanation, he also alludes to wondrous concepts, amazing concepts on a whole different level, on spiritual level. Gam Raz and Deraisa, even the deep secrets of the Torah. The Rebbe is quoting the Shalah. The Shalah is a rabbi who wrote a book called the Shnei Luchos Habris, the two tablets of covenant. He wrote a book on Jewish mysticism in the 1500s. I believe he was a rabbi in Krakow, 1600s. Many of his children are still alive today, actually. People have the same last name as him. But he wrote a book on Kabbalah, and he says, by the way, in his book, Rashi has a tremendous amount of Kabbalistic interpretation hidden in his words. As the Alter Rebbe would always say, that Rashi is the wine of the Torah. Now, what is the significance of wine? There are different Torah is compared to food in many places. Many places in Proverbs says Torah is food. So Rashi, so there are different types of food. So regular food is regular nutrition. That's like revealed parts of Torah. You need regular nutrition. Wine, what's specific about wine? So wine is compared to secrets. When wine comes in, secrets comes out. That's what it says everywhere in the Torah. So Rashi says, in Rashi is like wine. It's like grapes, and you crush them and make them into wine. If you learn Rashi, it'll arouse like this deeper level of your soul and secrets of the Torah. We'll move on. Because the Alter Rebbe and the Shalah say this about Rashi throughout the Torah, that Rashi has this spiritual element in it. For sure, in the first verse in the Torah, there's for sure the spiritual element. As in general, in Torah, we find a general rule that in the first statement or in the first of passage, it always alludes to a bunch of different things. Because the first passage is like inclusive of all of a lot of later things. Moving Gam Kain, Shayena Shalter Vaharash Yeshma Piska Zuli Yisa Tchilas Apers Cholter Shave, Einarakin Pratikim Klali Hashakal Klaus Termin. So here's what the Rebbe says, that basically it must be that in the first Rashi you must have the spiritual you must have these spiritual secrets. As well, it must have a general lesson about the whole Torah for every Jew. Something which is a general lesson which is connected to the whole Torah. Because Rashi, in the first Rashi, which the first in the cycle of Torah, the first thing is always inclusive of what comes out later on. We find in the Torah, and it's also Rashi also has a spiritual side. It must be there's a deep spiritual message to every Jew about Judaism in the first Rashi of the Torah. That's how the Rebbe is starting off this talk.
In
the first Rashi's first interpretation on the first verse.
But the first interpretation covers what?
So,
Chapter one
His
of
first
the-
comment.
First interpretation is his first comment on the Torah. Rashi goes and he comments on each verse, on whatever. So his first comment. So let's read his first comment on the Torah, and we'll actually see something quite fascinating. Rashi maschil pirushay ala Torah. How does Rashi start the Torah? It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Rashi says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak commented, Rabbi Yitzchak said, now who's Rabbi Yitzchak? It's actually interesting. Rashi quotes from Midrash, and he rarely puts names in. Here he puts the name of Rabbi Yitzchak. Now Rashi's father is named Rabbi Yitzchak, so some say he wanted to mention his dad, honoring his father, but even though his father is not the author of this, maybe his father taught it to him when he was, but we'll see. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, the Torah should have started with the first mitzvah. What is the first mitzvah of the Torah to the Jewish people? What is the first mitzvah?
The new moon.
The new moon, right? The mitzvahs of Abraham aren't really mitzvahs to us. The mitzvahs of Noah aren't really mitzvahs to us. Those are mitzvahs which came down into the world. We're supposed to actually be able to figure them out rationally also, right? The first mitzvah where God said to the Jewish people, do this thing directly to Moses, through Moses,
What
was?
about when he told Abraham to get circumcised?
So that's a very good question. When we give a circumcision, Rambam says, if you say, I'm going to give a circumcision because Abraham did it, you're not doing the mitzvah properly. We re-got the mitzvahs when the Torah was given. Only after we became the chosen nation can we truly receive mitzvahs from God, commandments from God. Yeah. However, it's interesting, the mitzvah of Abraham is unique. That it is it's the only mitzvah that we do today, that Abraham was told to do it by God. So we are connected to Abraham, but Abraham does not have the full fusion of the mitzvah that God gave by commanding it. So here the Jewish people are in Egypt, and God tells Moses, I'm taking you out. You're becoming the Jewish nation. And then he tells Moses, he says, when am I going to take you out? Well, first of all, look outside. This is the new moon. You start calculating the new moons. And then you'll take out this is the beginning of leaving of Egypt, of the mitzvahs of leaving Egypt. You'll take a lamb on the 10th day. You'll slaughter it on the 14th. 14th at night, you'll have a seder. You eat the lamb with matzah and mor. And then you will go out at midnight. You will be free, right? In fact, the Jewish people only leave the next day, right? God tells them you leave the next day, but they're free at midnight. So this is what he says. Amar Rav Yitzchak. Okay, so Rav Yitzchak says the Torah should start with the first commandment to the Jewish people. Why did God begin with in the beginning? Why does God begin with the creation of the world? Why? So this is what Rav Yitzchak says. Mishum koyach ma'asav higid la'amid las lahem lachas goyim. The strength of his works he related to his people to give them the inheritance of the nations. Shem yomer u'masayim Yisrael. If the nations of the world will tell Israel, listim atem, you are robbers, right? Shekivashtim artzas shiva goyim, you kicked out 7 nations from Israel, you stole the land of Israel from the 7 nations who were living there. Hey, the Jewish people can answer Lahem. Kol haaretz Kadosh Baruch Hu, everything belongs to God, who bara, he created it, v'nasna la'asher yasher be'einav, and he gave it to who he wanted to give it to, who he found fitting. They'll say, God wanted you to have it for this part of history, and now he wants us to have it.
So they're establishing the legitimacy
Of Israel. Yeah, of Israel.
But isn't it really saying the entire world?
He's saying the entire world, but when it comes to Israel, God can give whatever land he wants to give to whichever nation. When it comes to Israel, and we will be told to conquer Israel, we'll be able to say, God created it, He gave it to you, and now He's giving it to us.
So we're not colonials after all.
Well, it is very interesting because, we'll go into the talk here and we'll actually see the Rebbe's interesting perspective. But in the end of the day, right, if you don't have this Rashi, why do we deserve Israel? Right? If you don't have this Rashi. It's like God promised it to us. Let God give it. If God promised it, let God give it to us, right? Why do we need? And at the end of the day, if you don't have this Rashi, there's a lot of people in the world who have a hard time Jewish people's claim of Israel, right? A lot of people say, "What's your claim?" Oh, well, we say, well, it belonged to us a long time. So what? America belonged to the Indians. What is your claim to Israel? So this actually is the original claim to Israel, as God created the world, and then He told us to go get it. He said He's giving it. He's going to give it to us. Okay. Hahira. Okay, so that is the first Rashi. Now here's a simple thing. Why don't we say, well, it's talking about the beginning of creation of the world? It's like so simple. Why doesn't Rashi say that? It's like we want to know why about the world, how the world got here, right? Well, the answer is really it's not a good place for the Torah to start. Before God talks about creating the world, God should talk about why He wants to create the world, right? Wouldn't that be a big deal? Why I'm doing this, right? God should say, before the world's creating, I want to create the world for blank reasons, right? But here we start the Torah. God creates a world. He doesn't say why He's doing it, right?
Well, but just to throw out one good reason would be that every pagan religion started off with wars of gods, and one god turned out to be victorious and took the blood of the god he killed and made the world out of it, or whatever.
Correct, exactly. If God would say why...
He wants to distinguish us from all the other creations.
Well, if God would just say why He wants to create the world before He created it, it would answer a lot of questions, right? It would answer a lot of questions.
I think that's something we have to figure out on our own.
That's true, but the normal thing to do is to say why you're doing something before you do it, so know why you're doing it.
This is God.
So I'm saying here, the fact that Torah is starting Bereshis is a question. Why does it start? Why particularly in Bereshis? It's a question. This is a question. Rabbi Yitzchak's answer is the Torah is starting to tell us that God owns the world. He created and He owns it. Yes.
It seems, well, not to disagree with commentary, it seems to me it's establishing the supremacy of God. That it's more than just the land belongs to Israel. We are living on planet Earth, and all of our friends and enemies are as well. And some of those people have gods. But if God created the world, then everything, the world and everything connected to it is subordinate to God. So
that's true. That's a good point.
I'm not disputing your...
Correct. I'm pointing out
the why part.
That there was an existence before the world was created, right? And the Torah could have started the storyline from that existence. Like we know the Torah existed before the world was created.
Well, that's what you say. Yeah.
Right? That's what the prophets say. I didn't make that up. The prophets say that. Habakkuk says, I believe Habakkuk, he says, the Torah existed 2,000 years before the world was created. That's what he says. There were angels before the Torah. Jewish souls were before the Torah. There were mitzvahs. The idea of mitzvahs existed before the Torah, before the world was created. Jewish people, angels, the existence of the Torah, those all existed before the Torah. And yet, we only introduce the idea of mitzvahs much later. Even though they existed before the Torah, so we could have just put the beginning of the storyline earlier than Earth's creation. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak says, so that's just another question to keep in your mind, right?
Yeah, I don't want to dispute these other commentaries because my book of commentary has not been written. But it seems to me if God is writing the Torah,
correct,
right? So what the first question has to be, so God is establishing His own supremacy at the outset. Because we don't we're not aware of any existence
I agree with you.
that might have occurred before the world.
So why wouldn't God make us aware of that? This is just a question. In other words, God could have done a more thorough job, right? Imagine God would say, "I decided to create a world
God
with the Torah."
decided it wasn't important for us to know that.
No, 100%. So what we're addressing is what is Rashi's addressing, what everyone's addressing is why does God want us to know this and not more stuff, not more, not mitzvahs.
Because the most important thing in the Torah, I'm not pontificating, I'm just hypothesizing. The most important thing in the Torah is the supremacy of God.
So
God is supreme to all things.
So imagine God would say,
And that's
so
what God
imagine
wants
God
us
would,
to know.
well, so now here we have the Torah starts with the world. Imagine God would say, before there's a world, there's Torah and souls, because there were. And God said, everything in the world is to serve the Torah which exists before the world. Would that show the supremacy of God? Say, everything in the world is just to keep this Torah. Don't make a mistake and think the Torah came after the world. The Torah came before the world. That's what the prophets say. The prophet,
He had a different priority.
so correct.
God's priority was to establish his own supremacy.
Well, so this is what Rashi's dealing with. This is the question Rashi's dealing with. So that's the question that Rashi's dealing with. That's the question that all the commentators are dealing
But
with.
shouldn't we take it as, since God wrote this first,
So
shouldn't we take that as self-evident that this is the most important thing God wanted us to know from the beginning?
obviously, but my question to you is why wouldn't he do a more thorough job?
I'll ask him when I see
No,
him.
so this is how we study Torah. This is a question, right? This is our question. I'm not answering yet. Why wouldn't God do a more thorough job and say, I created a Torah. In the beginning, God created the Torah.
I don't know.
And then, so that's the question. I don't know either. I mean, at this point, that's a question to keep in the back of our mind.
Right, we're not at odds with each
No,
other.
correct. That's just a question I'm asking because that has to do with this discussion here. So, so now Rashi is saying, right? Now, Rashi's question is the Torah should have started from, Rabbi Yitzchak says, the Torah should have started from the first mitzvah. Because the purpose of the world is to do mitzvahs. That's the
Torah
purpose.
means the law,
So,
right?
so my
Torah is the law. It's the book of laws.
So it should have started with the law.
Yeah, it should have started with laws.
my question is,
Well, you know what we could have done? We could have started with the story of the Jewish people in Egypt and say God created the Jewish people to do mitzvahs, to do the laws. And then we could have had Moses go back and say, let me tell you how we got here, right? Let me tell you how we got here.
And then gone with the creation of the earth and the
And gone with the creation of the earth. It's all from Moses through Moses anyways, right? In other words, Moses wrote Bereshis and he wrote the whole Torah. So if it would have gone through that, maybe that would have been, starting off. Hey, by the way, listen up. You're Jewish and you have a purpose of doing mitzvahs in the world. And let me tell you what the world is that you're doing the mitzvahs in.
There's so many lessons for us basic lessons for us to learn about family relations, about the lack of law leading to the corruption and chaos of Noah, and other things that before you introduce Moses, you have to understand a lot of these basic concepts.
Who introduced them? Who do we have them from? We have all those things from Moses, right?
We have,
could do it as I think what the rabbi's saying
We
is.
do as a flashback,
Thank you, that's what I was
right?
just gonna say.
Well, who do we have it? It is a flashback. Who gave us the Torah?
Moses.
Moses. It's Moses' Torah, right? From God. So Moses could have written it, start with the current story of when he's writing the Torah, and say, God created the world. Here we have a mitzvah to have the Torah, a mitzvah to do Rosh Chodesh, a mitzvah to be the Jewish people, and go and do a flashback, right? We could have started with that. That would have done the same job. It did the same job. When we read the Torah, it is a flashback, right? Think about it.
In a larger context.
It's a flashback. Moses gave us the Torah.
Maybe we needed to learn the lessons before relearn the Torah.
Well, so obviously, that's what Rav Yitzchak is saying. By the way, it's really important to start with Bereshis because we need to be able to answer the Gentiles about Israel. That's what Rav Yitzchak was.
Do you know
But-
what should be the first pasuk in the Torah? Torah tzibah lanu Moshe Moshe.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Because it's just saying what's the.
A good play. A good.
It's in the last part of the Torah.
Yeah, you know, in the last part, the first verse we teach children. What's the first verse of Torah we teach your children? God gave us the Torah through Moses, and it belongs to all the Jewish people. That's the first thing we teach children. We want them to know that they are heirs of the Torah, right? But where is that verse written? In the last parsha of the Torah. You know, interestingly enough, in the Talmud it says, what's the first thing, the first portion of Torah children should study? Leviticus. Leviticus is the first part.
Oh, God.
You know, it's interesting because I read a book once and it said, you know, nowadays we always teach the kids Bereshis. Why? We teach usually some of Bereshis, and then we go to Noach and Lech Lecha. That gets the more thorough because that's easy parshas, stories. Leviticus is very difficult. The sacrifices. I read in a book once it says in the olden days Leviticus was the best. Kids love animals, you know. So it's hard if you don't have animals around. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But if you can go visit the temple, it's the easiest stuff. You know, here's the animal. You slaughter it here. You take the skin off. So kids would actually study that. We symbolically teach kids the first verse of Leviticus because that's the ancient tradition. But the thorough learning is Bereshis. But the first verse we teach them is God gave us the Torah. That's the first verse. And when is that verse written? In V'zos HaBracha. We'll read it on Simchas Torah Day. So, anyways, that's just okay. Anyways, not to go in. So I just wanted to shuffle up the feathers here a little bit, show that there's a question here that different commentators, they give different explanations of why we start with Bereshis, why the Torah starts off with Bereshis. Rabbi Yitzchak is obviously, Rashi says it's super important to know. You open the book of the Torah, first thing you got to know is that Israel belongs to the Jewish people.
No, but I think that Rashi here is agreeing with me.
I'm not, who's disagreeing with you? Who disagrees with you?
Because he says the entire earth belongs to the Holy One. Blessed be He. He created it and gave it to whoever He deemed proper. So,
Well, one second, you just took it out of context a little bit. I agree with you.
but
Rashi says to teach us what to answer the nations, right? We have to answer the nations. That's the first thing he says.
So this is just for the purposes of discussion, okay? Not
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. This is what Rashi's answer
that
is.
he's, what's contained here is more than just a dispute over land. What's contained here is a response to the dispute over who's in charge. And this is saying, well,
One second. So that's just an interesting point.
Yeah.
A response. So number one, Rashi says this is for a response to who? To Gentiles. The first thing you need to know in the Torah is how to respond to Gentiles. Rashi doesn't say the knowledge to know that the world belongs to God. He says first thing you need to know is to respond. How do you respond? You respond by, you can continue. That's another interesting thing that people...
that it's not just that the land is for us, it's that God is the one who created the land. Our God
Yeah, correct.
is the one who created it. So that seems to me,
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
it just goes back to what I was saying before, that God is establishing his supremacy.
Well, but again, so let's just. I mean, this sikha here is not going to hammer Rashi so much. It's going to more bring a more of a mystical, spiritual lesson from it. But it is an interesting Rashi. He says, "Why don't we start with the first mitzvah? We should start with the first mitzvah. That's the right thing, right?
That's a straw man,
What?
this first sentence.
Well, he says we should start with the first mitzvah, but he says, why don't we start with the first mitzvah? Because we need to answer the Gentiles when we take Israel, right? That's what he says. That's the reason. And then he said, that's the reason why. And then he says, if they say this, how do we answer them, right? So that is an interesting thing. Rashi's first comment on the Torah, when we open the book of the Torah, is the reason why it doesn't start from the first mitzvah is to answer the Gentiles.
Yeah, but
And then how do we answer the Gentiles? By saying that God created the world.
right, but I would submit that the very first words of Rashi, Rabbi Yitzchak commented that it should be Rosh Chodesh, is a straw man being set up by Rashi.
Well, it's a question, right? It's a question.
Well, I don't think
He said it should have started. It shouldn't have started. It should have only started from HaChodesh. But he said why, and says what's the reason it started with Bereshis, right? So actually, in a lot of different talks from the Rebbes on this, they say that it's like the Torah. The fact he says it should have started with HaChodesh. There's two attitudes. There's one attitude of starting with the first mitzvah, and one attitude of starting with Bereshis. There's two attitudes, and actually, I studied something with several people. I think with Paul and with Ed, I studied a mimer about this a long time ago, and it was a beautiful mimer. It says in the mimer, to compare it to, it says in the beginning of the world, Tishrei was the first month. When God chose the Jewish people, Nisan became the first month. And it said basically, Bereshis is the creation of nature, and HaChodesh is the beginning of Jewish supernatural behavior. And it says, in fact, which one came first? It's Jewish supernatural behavior or nature? It says really Jewish supernatural behavior came first, because the Torah came before Bereshis. So the question of Rabbi Yitzchak was, this is what it said there, his question is, why are we starting with nature of the world? Awesome. Why are we starting with nature of the world? Why don't we start with Judaism, supernatural behavior of God, which comes before the world? And the answer in that mimer was because in the world, part of being a Jew is figuring it out. And so that was an interesting mimer. But there's a lot of commentary on this Rashi here. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of commentary on this Rashi. But yeah, I hear, I agree with you. God is saying that He runs the world, but that itself is a question. Rashi phrases it in this whole roundabout way, right? Think about it.
All the stories of Genesis, Noah and Isaac and Jacob and Esau and the